There is a moment in healing that no one really wants to talk about. It's not the moment you realize what happened to you. It's the moment you realize what came through you. The moment you see that your pain did not only hurt you, it shaped the way you show up for your life, the way you loved, the way you reacted, the way you disappeared, the way you protected yourself from people who were never actually the threat. And if you've ever experienced that moment, you know how brutal it can feel. Because suddenly you are not grieving all that happened to you, you are also grieving the harm that happened through you. Maybe it was your child, or a partner, or a friend, or maybe it was someone who needed a safer version of you before you knew how to become one. And when that realization lands, the guilt and shame can come rushing in so loudly that it becomes hard to tell the difference between accountability and self-destruction. So today I want to talk about guilt, shame, and what real repair looks like, because they are not the same thing. This week I wrote an essay called Haunted by Hindsight about motherhood, trauma, and the grief of repairing what I wish I'd never ruptured. In it, I wrote about realizing that some of my unhealed trauma reached my son before I knew how to stop it. And one of the hardest parts about realizing that has been learning how to stay present to the pain I caused without disappearing into shame. But this isn't only about parenting. This is about any relationship where we look back and realize, I was hurting, and I hurt someone too. That's a hard truth to hold. And if you can already feel your body tensing as you hear me say it, please stay with me. Because this isn't about believing you're a bad person, and it's not about letting you off the hook either. This is about learning how to stay present long enough to move toward repair, because guilt, shame, and responsibility are not the same thing. Here is the cleanest way I understand the difference. Guilt says, I did something harmful. Shame says, I am harmful. Responsibility says, I am willing to understand the impact of my choices and change my behavior. Let me say it again. Guilt says, I did something harmful. Shame says, I am harmful. And responsibility says, I am willing to understand the impact of my choices and change my behavior. The distinction here matters because guilt can become a doorway, shame can become a trap, but responsibility is the only way through. Guilt can actually be useful when it tells us to pay attention. Something happened here. Someone was hurt. There's something to own. That kind of guilt can point us toward repair, to help us to see beyond ourselves. But shame takes that information and turns it into our identity. Shame says, I'm a terrible person. I'm broken. I'm just like the people who hurt me. I can't be trusted. I don't deserve forgiveness. I should punish myself forever. And when shame takes over, the focus shifts away from the person who was hurt and comes back on us. The question stops being, what did they experience because of me? And the question then becomes, am I still a good person? Am I a monster? Can someone please tell me I'm not terrible? And I say that gently because I know that place. I know what it means to hear the pain you've caused and feel your whole body want to collapse under the weight of shame. I know what it is to want to explain, to say, but you have to understand what was happening to me at the time, to want to make sure they know you weren't trying to hurt them, to make sure that they know you were hurting too. But this is where things get complicated, because context does matter. There is definitely a difference between intentionally causing harm and causing harm from an unhealed place. There's a difference between cruelty and a trauma response, between malice and overwhelm. But the impact here still matters. Someone can understand why we were hurting and still be hurt by what happened. Someone can know that we were doing our best and still grieve what our best cost them. Someone can still love us and need us to hear how their life was altered by our choices. And that is where real repair begins. It's not when we explain ourselves well enough to be absolved or when we punish ourselves enough to prove we care. It's not when the other person says it's okay so we can stop feeling guilty. Repair begins when we can stay present for the truth of what happened without putting our shame in the center of the room. Because when shame takes over, we often move into self-protection. We defend, over-explain, shut down, avoid the conversation, apologize in ways that pressure the other person to comfort us. We rush them toward forgiveness because we want relief. And none of that makes us evil. It just means our nervous system is interpreting the accountability as danger. If you grew up in a home where mistakes were punished, where love was withdrawn, where being wrong meant being unsafe, where accountability might not feel neutral in the body, then it might feel like a threat. It might feel like abandonment. It might feel like annihilation. So when someone says, you hurt me, your body might not hear there is something here to repair. Your body could hear, I'm bad, I'm unsafe, I'm about to be rejected. And from that place, it makes sense that we would want to defend, avoid, explain, or disappear. But here's the hard part. If the person we hurt has to manage our shame before they can tell the truth about their pain, repair gets interrupted because now they're no longer sharing their experience. They're taking care of our reaction to their experience, which can become another rupture in itself. So what does real repair actually look like? Real repair is not one apology. Repair is what happens after the apology. It is listening without defending, validating without correcting, apologizing without demanding absolution, changing behaviors without needing recognition, giving someone time without punishing them for needing it, letting their hurt come back to the surface without saying, I thought we were past this. And that one really matters because we want repair to be one conversation. We want to apologize, be forgiven, and move on. But pain does not always reveal itself at one time. Oftentimes people need more time to understand how something affected them. They need language that they didn't have when the harm first happened. Sometimes they forgive quickly because they want the conversation to be over, but then realize later there was more they needed to say. Real repair leaves room for that. It says, you can bring this back to me when you need to. I will not punish you for still feeling hurt. My apology is not the expiration date for your healing. I am willing to keep listening. And real repair does not require you to hate yourself forever. And this is so important because self-punishment is not accountability. Sometimes it's just shame wearing a different suit. It can feel productive to keep beating ourselves up. Like if we just keep suffering enough that maybe the suffering will prove how much we actually care. But repair and guilt aren't the same. Self-punishment is not the same as becoming safer. The people we hurt do not need us to spend the rest of our lives disappearing into shame. They need us to become more honest. They need us to become more available, more emotionally regulated, more willing to listen, more able to change. And that is harder than self-punishment because self-punishment can happen alone behind closed doors. Repair requires relationship. It requires humility. It requires staying open to someone else's truth, even when you want to hide. It requires letting someone else's pain matter without immediately making it mean that you are beyond redemption. So when guilt starts to spiral, I come back to these 3 questions. The first is, what is mine to own? Not what makes me the villain, because this isn't about recounting every bad thing that's ever happened. It's not listing the blame that also belongs to someone else. It's an acknowledgement of what is mine to own. Was there a behavior I'm not proud of? A reaction, an absence, a pattern I continued, a way I defended myself, a way I disappeared, a way I made someone else feel like their needs were too much? The second question is, what do they need me to hear? This is not, what do I want to explain? This is not, what do I hope they understand about me? Or what would make me feel less ashamed? But what do they need me to hear? What was the impact of my choices? What was the need underneath the pain they're sharing? What truth are they trusting me with here? And then the third question is, what can I do differently next time? Because I'm not perfect. I don't want to perform or pretend to change. I'm not looking to earn instant forgiveness to just do the same thing again. I want to show up differently for them going forward. So what's the next right behavior? Maybe it's pausing before I react. Maybe it's saying, I need a minute, but I'm not leaving this conversation. Maybe it's asking, do you want me to listen, apologize, or solve something? Maybe it's following through on something I said I would change, or going to therapy. Maybe it's learning how to regulate my body so other people do not have to keep absorbing my dysregulation. Maybe it's simply becoming more honest about the patterns that exist in my life. These are the questions that move me from shame into responsibility. And because this is a topic that can bring up a lot in our body, I want to pause here for a moment. If it feels okay, I'd like you to place a hand on your heart or someplace else on the body. Maybe that's the belly, maybe that's the chest, maybe it's the surface beneath you. And then I'd like you to take a slow breath, counting to 4. And then let it out slowly, counting to 8. Now notice what happens in your body when you think about guilt. Is there a part of you that wants to defend? A part that wants to disappear or explain or avoid? You're not trying to judge it here. You're You're just trying to notice it. And then you might consider repeating after me. I can feel this guilt without becoming it. I can take responsibility for my actions without turning myself into a monster. I can stay present with the harm I caused someone else. Now, bring yourself back to your breath. Breathe in again for a count of 4. And breathe out for a count of 8. The goal here is not to become perfectly regulated before you work on the repair. The goal is to build enough capacity to stay present with the harm you caused someone else, to stay in the conversation, to stay connected to your values, to stay open to the other person's experience, to stay honest about what happened, to stay committed to becoming safer than you were before. If you are carrying guilt for harm that you caused while you were hurting, I don't want to tell you to just let it go, because sometimes guilt is asking us to pay attention. Sometimes it's the part of us that knows something needs our attention. But I also don't want you to confuse lifelong self-punishment with repair. The people we hurt do not need us to blame ourselves forever. They need us to become safer. Safer in how we listen, how in our honesty, in the way that we love them. Because repair is not perfection. It is not immediate absolution, and it is not proving that you never meant to hurt anyone. It is the decision to stay open to the truth of what happened and to become someone committed to causing less harm moving forward. Because guilt can show us where the wound is. Shame can keep us trapped inside it. But responsibility asks us to be someone who does less harm with what hurt us. And that is where repair begins. If this connected with you, I wrote more about my specific experience in this week's essay, Haunted by Hindsight, which is available for free on my Substack. The link is below. And if it brought something up for you, I'd like you to be gentle with yourself, because shame rarely helps us repair, but presence usually does.